Hey booktube, hi, oh my gosh, hi, how are you? Hi. So if you probably clicked on this video or are here to spend time with me in order to discuss Middlemarch by George Eliot, which I finished a little over a week ago, and so I've been able to marinate in my thoughts a little bit. And so hi, if you're new here, then welcome. I'm so glad that you are here. I'm Shelly. I love books and reading. It's one of my most favorite things in the world. And I have this whole channel dedicated to my thoughts, I suppose, or really conversations with friends about books and reading. And yeah, if you like that kind of thing, if you would like to join the conversation or just hang out with me from time to time, then I would encourage you to subscribe and stick around. So you all are getting a very, I'm going to set this down and then I'll pick it up when I actually start talking about the book. So that way it'll be kind of a visual marker for all of you who are maybe not as into the life stuff. So I typically don't enjoy doing single book reviews because I think it really boils down to the fact that I don't feel like I'm very good at them. I feel quite disorganized. It's not really a video essay. It's more of a long ramble about my thoughts about the book. And there's not a lot of organization. I mean, I've tried single book reviews in a couple of different ways, and I always feel like it falls apart. And so I feel like I would like to just come on camera, to come onto BookTube and just say, hey, I don't feel like I'm a great single book reviewer, but I want to get better. And so this is my attempt to get better. So hopefully I can incorporate more single book reviews on my channel, and hopefully I can develop, I can get better at doing them. Like I can actually develop a way that I can do them for me, because I want to get better at it, but I feel like it's hard to want to get better at something you don't feel very good at in the first place. And I mean dedicated single book reviews in which you talk about a whole bunch of thoughts without spoiling the book. So this will be a spoiler-free review about George Eliot's Middlemarch. So let's just go ahead and get into, with all of that, out of the way. I'm tired, I feel like I've used a whole lot of energy, and yet I'm sitting down to talk about one of the greatest novels in the English language, and I don't feel like I'm very good at book reviews. So with all of that in mind, let's just go ahead and get into the meat of this video. So Middlemarch was first published between the dates of 1871 and 1872. It was published in installments, and it is set, the setting of Middlemarch is actually 50 years before, 40 years before. So it's set in 1929 and goes through the years to 1931. And there are some historical events that George Eliot captures in her writing, but to me that was not really the point of this book. It's not really focusing on the historical events of that time. So we are set in this fictional town called Middlemarch, and it's about Middlemarch and the surrounding areas. And I would say, actually, I have a whole list of the characters, which I think I will grab right now. I keep getting interrupted. I think what I was saying was that the Middlemarch is about a place, but there are two, I would say, well, there's a lot to be impressed by, but there are two standout things to me that were really impressive. One of which was the intricate plotting, but more importantly, or probably more impressively, are George Eliot's characters. Oh my gosh, they are incredible. So at the beginning of the novel, we meet the Brooke sisters. There is Celia and Dorothea Brooks. Brooke, rather not Brooks, Brooke. And quickly we zero in, we zoom in and focus on Dorothea, who is at the precipice of choosing between two suitors. And that's probably the very first conflict we bump up against. And I think this is one of the themes, not the marriage theme, but this whole idea that we are faced with choices, like huge choices in our lives. And Dorothea was, faced with this choice a suitor that is young and vibrant and, is quite in love with her, and then a suitor that is older and an academic. And she makes a choice. And a lot of the novel has to do with the idealism that we might have, like the fantasy self. Like George Eliot was talking about the fantasy self before we on the internet or out there in psychology really even had a term for the fantasy self. But she had this idea of how she wanted her life to go and what her marriage would look like. And she based her choice on her suitors on that idea. This idea that she wanted her life to go down a very certain path because she wanted to do something that was very particular. And it's about living with the consequences and the fallout of those choices. And I thought that was brilliant. Can I get that word out, actually? I thought that was brilliant because we see her through the entire path of her making the choice and then slowly and very sort of sadly realizing the choice that she made, and then having to live and deal with and work through the choice that she made and her unhappiness through that. Wow. So I thought that was incredible. Oh my gosh, I got lost on Dorothea. So if you cannot tell, I love Dorothea. I think a lot of it was that I can relate to her, not necessarily, in case you all are like reading into my thoughts a little bit, or like reading into me IDing with, or maybe I'm reading into myself IDing with Dorothea. I wanted to be really clear, especially as I talked to my husband about Middlemarch, that I identify with her as a person who tends to look at and fantasize about the idealistic versions of life. And sometimes it takes me a little while to become grounded in some of the decisions that I've made, and I have to go through almost like a learning curve of realizing that this is my life now. That this is like one of the things that I'm thinking about in particular in my own life was that when I was leaving California, when I was moving from California, and this was over a decade ago, y'all. When I was moving from California, I had this mindset of like, anywhere but here is going to be better. Everything is going to be amazing in our new location. And we moved, and I had to learn that every place in this universe, every place on earth has positives and it has negatives. And, and realizing that it has both was quite the learning curve. And it was, emotionally destroying for me at times. It was something that I had to work through, and then coming to a place of contentment with where I'm at now, and being able to continue to look at the positive while also accepting the negative. And I feel like because I've been through that when I read about a character who was also going through huge life changes and then having to look at and deal with the fallout of those choices was really, really incredible. Harry wanted to join the conversation. So I think I'm going to stick with the women. I'm going to stick with the women. The next woman, female character, and, maybe as I'm going through, I think maybe this is the best way or the most natural way I want the conversation to go. So the next character is going to be Mary Garth. Mary Garth is truly the most level-headed and grounded character that you meet. I think in a lot of ways she's hard to read. You know that she wants to do the right thing, that she's very driven to do the right thing, but her ideas of the right thing aren't rooted in idealism like Dorothea. She is rather sensible. She's sensible. You kind of meet her, when you meet her in the novel, she's not a very flattering character, and I feel like Mary Garth is someone that grows on you over time, and I really quite liked that. And then she ends up, I don't want to, I'm not giving away any spoilers or anything, but she was someone that I ended up quite liking a lot. I really respected her as a character, and I think that that's hard to say, especially when George Eliot is so good at drawing multi-dimensional characters. Then we have Rosamond. We have Rosamond Vincy, who I think comes off quite vapid. She comes off very, she's a really good student. She's very beautiful, and she seems shallow. And I think what I found surprising about her was that she comes off shallow, but she's not as shallow or unintelligent as she may first appear. And so there are some things about Rosamond that I was like, she was quite clever. She knows how to work the system. She knows how to work the relationships. It's like she is a little bit out of touch with reality. She wants her life to go in a very particular way, and she doesn't understand how to be sensible to go about it. And so some of her struggles felt very modern, which I thought was fascinating. And then we have her brother, Fred. Oh, Fred. I think Fred could easily be someone that people quite dislike, depending on your read of him. But he's very boyish and he's very immature. And I think for me, I was rooting for Fred to grow. I was like, and mind you, most of these characters are about the same age. They're in their early 20s. They're really getting started on life, choosing their careers. They're trying to they're trying to get their life going, you know. And Fred is like, he's a little bit idealistic, but in a way that his decisions are immature. There's like no better word for it. He's the kind of person that takes a risk because immediately he wants a rush of dopamine. That's the kind of character Fred is. And I think for me, if you just sat in the state of like, I'm just annoyed with Fred and I don't agree with his decisions and why doesn't he grow up? I think you will be annoyed with him, like that could be a takeaway. I could see someone reading it like that. But for me, I was like, Fred, Fred, like just find a wonderful mentor and you will be set, Fred, just find somebody that will lead you. I feel like I'm having a gossip session for friends, like I'm sitting here gossiping about a bunch of friends. But there was just like, I just want to be like, Fred, I wish he would just grow up. So we have Fred, Rosamond's brother. Some of the early parts of the novel, my favorite dialogue was between Rosamond and Fred because they bicker and they banter and it's really quite fun. All right, then, oh my goodness, then we'll continue with the men. Someone who is not boyish, someone who is a bit older. We have Mr. Casaubon. And Mr. Casaubon is an intellect. And he is somebody who has been working in the field of intellectual matters his whole life. And I think he's somebody, which comes up a lot, especially in the male characters, that suffers from a lot of pride. And, Mr. Casaubon, I think of all the characters, though he is dimensional, he's the easiest one to dislike, which is kind of interesting. Okay, and then we have two final characters. We have Tertius Lydgate. Now, Tertius Lydgate is a doctor, and he's in the field of doctoring for the right reasons. He wants to make a breakthrough in science. He comes to the town of Middlemarch and starts working with the townsfolk, and he does it in a way because he wants time to work on his studies in a way, but not for the intellectual pursuit, but in a lot of ways to break through the medical industry. So he's got a really like high task for himself, or he sets himself a high bar, and he is like really smart about it. And that leads him to trouble. Like in a lot of ways, I really respect Tertius Lydgate because of the way he's gone about his work in the world. He's like, I know we can make strides in the medical field, and I'm here and I want to do it. But again, he makes some choices that puts that pursuit in conflict. And then finally, we have Will Ladislaw. And Will Ladislaw is like a little lost sheep. He's a wanderer. He's a little bit aimless. And he is living off the funds of his, I think it's his uncle, Mr. Casaubon. And in some ways, he wants to pursue art. And in some ways, he wants to go in other directions. Again, quite directionless. And of course, you know, he's got a sordid background, or so it seems, and part of the novel is uncovering this background and what it actually means. So that is our cast of 7 characters. And here, I think because I'm such a character-driven reader, here is my favorite. And then, you know, hopefully, maybe I'll get into like some final thoughts, because I really don't want to give away the plot. Because for one, like there's so many different conflicts. It's like once you're invested in all of the characters, you just want them. You want the best for them. And you see why. You see why they are falling down in the way that they're falling down. You see why they're suffering in the way that they're suffering. And you're like, oh, if you could just... And it's not that you even have a solution, but it's like you feel the feelings with them. Okay, so we have our... Oh, hello. My gracious, Harry... Here's the deal with George Eliot's characters. They are all so dimensional. No, even though you could say, for example, Rosamond is vapid, is shallow, there are times where she is vulnerable. There are times when she is tricky. You understand as a reader why she is the way that she is, because it's explained, but it's explained in the way that she, you know, it's told to you like a story. And not, I mean, it's told to you as part of the story, but she doesn't just say, oh, Rosamond is like this because of this. It's like she goes into this sort of backstory about Rosamond, and you really get an understanding of why she makes the decisions that she makes. Because George Eliot is just a master at that. She's not just like, oh, let me just tell you this, and let me just make these characters damaged and done in a way that like is sort of strange and off kilter. No, she does it in this way where she's like kind of taking you down these little paths and winding around and coming very circuitously, and then sort of landing back on Rosamond, and you're like, wow, I can see why Rosamond is the way that she is and why she's making the decisions that she's making. And so I feel like it is rooted in empathy. It is rooted in understanding. It's rooted in groundedness. Nobody feels fake or out of sorts, because there is like this understanding that this vulnerable understanding that George Eliot brings to the table, in which she is able to just say, hey, there is this character, and they are the way that they are, but they are the way that they are because of where life has led them. And let me tell you the way that their life has been. And it's just so good. I mean, it's so good. Okay, there's 2 more things I would like to talk about. We already talked about intricate plotting, which I'm really not going to get into, because there's so much. There's so much going on in Middlemarch. It is a gossipy little town. Your reputation means something. What the people say means something. George Eliot does such an incredible job giving voice to that like Greek chorus, you know, the Greek chorus in the background, in which it really does cause quite the impact, especially later on in the book, which was brilliant. But I will say, I really, really, really loved the narrator's voice. The narrator is kind of snarky. The narrator has an opinion, and the narrator converses with the reader and is like, well, this is my take on this situation, and this is Harry is just having the time of his... Harry, the narrator has this kind of voice that is kind of like, even though you know circuitously with this beautiful narrative why, you know, I'm sort of stuck on Rosamond, why Rosamond is the way that she is. Sometimes the narrator will be like, wait a second. Just so you know, don't just feel sorry for Rosamond, or, you know, I think of the narrator as a she, so then the narrator will also just sort of insert herself, and she'll be like, well, no. We're not going to go down this path of, you know, this thought, even though it may have, the writing may have led you there. Give it a second. Hold your horses, because I think this story is going to take a turn, and you're like, oh, okay, all right. I see you, narrator. And some of my favorite parts was when the narrator inserted herself, because I just love that. I was so all about it. Now, my last two thoughts, I suppose, kind of come together as one. One of which is George Eliot's writing is gorgeous. It's gorgeous. I read the introduction a couple of times just to get into the rhythm of her writing. And I will say that sometimes it does take a minute. It did take, at least from my experience and from what I've heard of others, it does take a minute to get into the rhythm of the writing. And so if you are picking up Middlemarch and it's taking you a little while, just stick with it. You'll get into a rhythm, I promise you. Let me read you the first 2 sentences. Miss Brooke had that kind of beauty which seems to be thrown into relief by poor dress. Her hand and wrists were so finely formed that she could wear sleeves not less bare of style than those in which the Blessed Virgin appeared to Italian painters. And her profile, as well as her stature and bearing, seemed to gain the more dignity from her plain garments, which, by the side of provincial fashion, gave her the impressiveness of a fine quotation from the Bible, or from one of our elder poets in a paragraph of today's newspaper. I just really loved her writing. It is beautiful, and sometimes it's a bit circuitous, sometimes it's a bit wordy, but I loved it. I loved every word. Okay, now finally, I will say that there is a, every chapter starts with a quotation, and in those quotations, George Eliot quotes literally all of the ancients, like all of the canon, I would say, that preceded her. So she's got Chaucer, she's got Italian poets, she's got things in Latin, she references Shakespeare, she references basically everyone. And all of those quotations really add something to the chapter, which I thought was amazing. So, if you haven't, so this is my final thought. My final thought is this. As an introduction to George Eliot, I've never read anything by George Eliot before, and so this was my introduction to her work. I loved it. I loved it. This is a Shelley book to a T. I thought it was beautiful. There was times where I ugly cried as I was thinking about the concepts that she was writing about the way that we change internally and the way the world looks different because of that internal change. It's so much about idealism and about women and about women's relationships with each other and women's relationships with men, and it's about marriage. It is about so much. It's about pride and communication and the way that we communicate with others and being vulnerable. And it is done so well. It is done so well. I loved this book. I mean, I was jokingly saying, this is the GOAT. This is the greatest of all time for me. I love this book. I think that basically one of the first books I read this year is going to be the best book I've read in my entire life. That's how I feel. I feel like I have been immersed in a beautiful and incredible and impressive and gorgeously done piece of art. And I was excited to get back to it. If I did not get to it for a day, it took me a solid 3 weeks to read. And if I waited a day to not read it because I was too tired, I've started a new job amid reading this book. If I was too tired to get to it, if I was, too busy, I would miss it. And actually, when I got to the last page, you know what my feeling was? My feeling was it could have been longer. This is like an 800-page book, and I literally thought this could have been longer. Who am I? Who am I that was my critique? I was like, I just want to be in this world longer. So anyways, thankfully, George Eliot has other novels out there, and I have a couple of them. And thankfully, I can always read the book again. So yeah. So if you have never read this before, if you've never read Middlemarch by George Eliot, and you're wondering, is it worth my time? For me, wholeheartedly, like if you were taking my advice, wholeheartedly, 100%, it is worth it. So good. Just an absolute masterpiece. And if you're just like, I don't know, what do you think? Then just know that like I'm just like, yes. This is basically the greatest book I've ever read and the greatest book of all time. I just loved it. So If you are probably, you know, we do these tags on booktube, or we do these videos like best books I've read this year, so far this year. I feel like this is going to pop up for the rest of the year. So I'm sorry, not sorry, if you're going to get sick of, you know, seeing this on my channel. But it was amazing. It was so good. It was so good. Start to finish. Amazing. Like, there wasn't even a slumpy middle, in my opinion. It doesn't get slumpy. It's so good. Okay, that's it. Okay, that's it. I'm gonna get all worked up and excited, but yeah, that's it for me. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here and hanging out and listening to me ramble on about Middlemarch by George Eliot. And yeah, I hope you know, if you've read the book, let me know. Give me a comment down below. Like, you know, I'd love to talk to more people who have read this. And if not, you know, and you were just, you know, here to hang out, then hi, you know, hi. I know it's more like, you know, then thank you for hanging out. I'm clearly losing it a little bit because I'm really tired. But anyways, but that's it for me. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here. I really, really appreciate it. And I will see you all in my next one. Bye.